Recently, I discovered some new information that might actually change all of our theories about Poppy Playtime, including some things that I think I haven't seen anyone else talk about yet. Welcome theorists to another Tericho theory. Today we're taking another trip back into the busiest abandoned toy factory, Playtime Co. You see, with the recent-ish release of the Orientation notebook, we've been given a few more details about the company behind everyone's favourite mascots. But while we've all been scouring these games, ARGs, VHS videos, and now the book, looking for clues about all of these BBCs, these big-bodied characters, we might have all been misdirected. In fact, I think there is an even greater threat in Playtime Co. than these living toys. So get your snacks and get comfy, because today's theory is mind-bending. Literally. We've now had 3 chapters, a side game, several VHS videos, multiple ARGs, and finally, the Orientation notebook. That is quite a lot of lore for us to theorize over. Thanks, Mob, for keeping my bills paid. But there is just so much that we don't know. There are loads of gaps in our knowledge, so many inconsistencies, and plenty of things that just don't seem to make any sense. Many of these mysteries center around the player character, known only in the games as the player. We know almost nothing concrete about the person we play as, aside from the fact that we used to work in the factory. Chapter 3 elaborated on this a little bit more, showing us that we harbored some guilt for our involvement in Playtime Co., and there have been hints throughout the entire series that we were relatively high up on the company ladder. The player has memories of the children in Playcare, and Mommy recognized us in Chapter 2. Whoever this character is, they seem like a key player, and they definitely had access to some of the more restricted areas of the factory. But we still don't have any indication on who this player is. Except the Orientation notebook might have just given us a huge clue to this. The book is written as if it's an employee manual, a guide for new and existing employees. The book actually contains a ton of new information. We get a confirmation that many staff were kept in the dark about the real experiments. We get an explanation for what happened to Jimmy Roth. He was blamed for the disaster that was the Smiling Critters, and he was replaced because of it. This was actually one of the main reasons why Playtime Co. started losing money. The Smiling Critters show was not very popular due to people finding catnap, well, kind of creepy, and the incident with the catnap dolls being sent out containing the red smoke was a huge blow to customer confidence within the company. I actually think this is a perfect explanation for this missing name on the slides. If you notice, all of these names line up with these heads of departments. The only one that is missing is Jimmy Roth, the Chief Marketing Officer. Now that we know he took the blame for the Smiling Critters fiasco, he was likely replaced, and this person here would have been his replacement as the new Chief Marketing Officer. And of course, they were in the middle of being replaced when the Hour of Joy happened. But most importantly, we get an explanation for why this goddamn puzzle exists. Apparently someone hit the buttons repeatedly, causing it to malfunction. That's why this was so obnoxious. The notebook has notations and commentary from its owner, a mysterious character known only as PW. We do learn that they had a lot of intimate knowledge of Playtime Co. Many of the corporate claims in this book are disputed, and it's made obvious that PW knows a lot of it is lies. They were well aware of the company spying on its employees, and they knew all about the experiments that were being carried out in secret in the lower levels of the factory. But as mysterious as this character is, when compared to the main character of the games, things begin to line up. Just like the player, PW seems to feel a strong level of guilt for their involvement in the experiments in the factory. They were hired by Playtime Co. as a biologist, something that they were initially confused by. Why exactly would a toy factory need such a scientist? But the notes go on to explain that PW was indeed involved in the experiments. The experiments that we know were surgeries to transform orphan children into living toys for the Bigger Bodies initiative. This is something that clearly took a mental toll on PW. They even called in sick on the date that new orphans were being brought into the playcare, unable to face them, knowing what would eventually happen to some of them. This character could actually fit the player perfectly. This would explain why we had memories of all these children in the playcare, why we were haunted by them, and why we feel an immense amount of guilt. There is even a potentially bigger piece of evidence for this though. In Chapter 2, the Bonzo Bunny cutout guesses your birthday as
June 28th.
In the calendar at the back of the Orientation notebook, PW's birthday is, you guessed it. Now perhaps PW was just the last person that Bonzo saw before the downfall of the factory, or perhaps the cutout was just programmed with their birthday in mind. But there is also the possibility that Bonzo here is actually telling the player our birthday in this moment. So right now PW is as good a candidate as any, but who could PW be? This is yet another mystery, but there is a chance we could already know this. There is only one character in the entire game so far whose surname begins with W, Dr. White. Now this is the voice we hear coming to collect one of the orphans in Chapter 3. He comes to collect Sam with what sounds like Mr. Light telling the children to cheer them on in the background.
Ah, and here they all are.
Well, of course. They'd never miss this.
Listen, Mrs. Brooks, we're going away.
Tell us. This week, Dr. White here has selected our very own Samuel Lee.
This would also line up. A biologist could be a doctor. Both characters are directly involved in the experiments and surgeries, and both have a surname beginning with W. Alright, so PW might be the player character, but I promised that this theory was going to delve into darker territory, and don't worry, we're going to go there. Whoever this player character is, one thing is abundantly clear. They are haunted by what happened in the factory. Chapter 3 introduced the idea that the player's mental state might be far worse than we thought. I mean, it would have to be to get them to come back here, right? But we got some pretty major clues during the first hallucination sequence. First we had the radio playing a message backwards, then we had this message scratched into the floor right alongside a suspicious segment of wallpaper that looks like a Rorschach inkblot test. Something used historically in psychology to determine your mental state. But to add to this, the player also hears voices throughout the entire game. The Chapter 2 trailer had Poppy whispering "Wake up."
Wake up.
Something that continued into the start of the chapter. We can hear voices that sound like children in some areas of Home Sweet Home. And finally, during the final hallucination sequence in Chapter 3, we get Poppy's voice yet again, talking about our mental state.
Do you even know what's real? No, you don't.
This one line stuck with me after Chapter 3. Could this be the key to explaining all of those weird little inconsistencies? We now know that the red smoke can cause hallucinations, but I think there is far more to it than just that. There was one detail in the notebook that seemed really out of place. Among the rules for employees, PW notes that Playtime Co were especially concerned with staff hygiene, so much so that they would even do random checks on employees' fingernails. This seems a little bit weird even by Playtime Co's standards, and we know that they were spying on the staff. But on the next page, we can probably see the reason for this. Playtime Co were concerned with staff members developing schizophrenia. Now this is a complicated psychological disorder and there is a lot of misinformation in popular culture about it, but taking a closer look at the symptoms, this becomes very interesting. One major symptom of schizophrenia is hallucinations. People can experience things that aren't there. They can see, hear, or even smell things that don't exist outside of their mind. One of the most common types of hallucination though is hearing voices. This is something our protagonist has consistently experienced throughout the series, but with schizophrenia, these voices can come from different sources, such as radios, televisions, maybe even cardboard cutouts. One of the defining symptoms of this is the idea that the patient believes these voices to be coming from someone else, even though they are created in their own mind. This could even explain the death screens. We have for a long time been theorizing who was talking to us when we die. If the player character is indeed suffering from schizophrenia, then these could be just one more example of our fractured mental state. The player believing they came from someone else, them even showing us as coming from a television. Now, it's entirely possible that schizophrenia was just a cover for Playtime Co, a way for them to explain any weird symptoms for anyone who might have unwittingly come into contact with the red smoke. But I don't think so. The fact that they were constantly checking staff members' fingernails is a huge hint that they were genuinely worried about employees experiencing these symptoms. Lack of personal hygiene is, once again, a symptom of schizophrenia, and if they were only using it as a cover, why go through the effort of checking staff like this? But I have even more evidence that there was more going on. One of the earliest things we noticed about Laith Pierre is that he seemed paranoid. The way he talks in the very first VHS makes him seem a little on edge, and the rules on the Kissy Missy poster talk about people hiding behind doors to scare him. Well, what is another major symptom of schizophrenia? Yep, you guessed it, paranoia. Paranoid delusions are another common symptom. Patients may believe they are being targeted. As the NHS describes, they may believe they're being followed, watched, chased. Now, of course, the chased part of that could be very interesting considering every single chapter has had at least one chase scene, but this could really explain Laith's paranoid behavior. The irony here being that at least some of the paranoia was warranted. So Playtime Co were worried about staff members developing this condition. Laith Pierre seems like he might have ended up with it, and the player character absolutely seems to fit this diagnosis too. PW in the book even talks about the idea that there was this weird atmosphere and people seem to be slowly going crazy. But why would the staff members in the factory all be developing this condition? Well, the causes for schizophrenia, like many mental disorders, are not fully understood, but it seems like the two major factors in developing it are stressful life events and drug misuse. This would make total sense. We know that the factory contained the red smoke, and it's entirely possible that working around this chemical was causing more harm than they realized. Remember, Thomas Clark, the pediatrician who Theodore was taken to after his accident, ended up with lung cancer. This was the whole reason why he was transferred into the Brontoy. I think this lung cancer was caused by being exposed to the red smoke. We know that this gas is highly potent, but what I think Playtime Co might not have considered is that it was being used underground in confined spaces. All it would take is part of the air ventilation system to fail, and suddenly this gas could start building up inside the factory. I think we were given huge hints to this throughout the game series. Every single chapter has one of these steam jump scares. In fact, chapter 2 had 2 of them. But what if this was a hint all along? Rather than just being a cheap jump scare, this was Mob hinting that the ventilation system was leaking dangerous gases into the entire factory. After all, one of the side effects of the company losing money was that the factory was starting to fall into disrepair. We can see giant holes in the ground covered up by planks, meaning this factory had started to fall apart way before the hour of joy. So unbeknown to Playtime Co, their staff were slowly being exposed to the red smoke and other chemicals used in the factory. They were slowly being poisoned and slowly losing their minds. Between the chemicals in their system and the stresses of working for this factory under people like Harley Sawyer and Laith Pierre, and of course for some, the trauma and guilt of operating on orphan children, no wonder why many of the staff were developing psychological conditions. This leads to an interesting dilemma though. If our protagonist does indeed suffer with schizophrenia, then can we really trust what we have seen so far? How much is real and how much is delusion? Are any of these toys even really alive, or are they just delusions we made up to guide us along to our goal? Remember, back in chapter 1, Poppy seemed asleep. It was only after we opened her case and exposed ourselves to the red smoke within that she woke up and started talking to us. Anything from this point on is now unreliable. Now personally, I don't really like the idea that none of it was real, but I do like the idea that we might be misinterpreting some of it. But I'm still not done. This theory leads me on to something I have not seen a single person talk about. There has been something on my mind ever since CG5 released his music video for the game. In the music video that Mob posted on their channel, there is one tiny segment that sticks out like a sore thumb. Towards the end of the song, right in the middle of the music, we get a shot of Poppy's case empty. The music quiets down, the scene changes to black and white, and a bunch of dolls with glowing eyes appear asking, If you watch this video, this scene sticks out so much. It's a complete change of pace and the music stops in this part. I think this is a huge hint that the factory contains far more than just the living toys we've seen so far. One detail that seems to be cropping up lately is that not all of the experiments were successful. In fact, we've seen only a handful of living toys so far, and we know that the experiments were numbered in their thousands. We saw that some of the experiments were not fully successful, as is the case with Bron, and it's heavily suggested that more failed too. The book describes how the first Bobby Bear Hug experiment was not successful either. This page describes how creepy this Bobby experiment really was. The transfer surgery was not a complete success. Bobby couldn't hear, and she also couldn't speak. Even though she tried to talk, she couldn't produce any words, and at one point, she even tried to scream, but there was nothing but silence. So we know that there were many failures when it came to these experiments, but what if the failures were even worse? Any surgery carries risks, and these were essentially full brain transplants. I have no doubt in my mind that some patients did not survive the procedure, and once again, looking at the number of experiments being in their thousands, I am willing to bet that more than a few deaths were caused by these surgeries. So we had all of these orphan children dying in this underground facility, all these failed experiments. What if this scene here, Can You See Us, was a huge hint that Playtime Co is haunted? I think we've all been so focused on the living experiments that we forgot about the ones that aren't living. All of those deaths could have been hinted at with these scratched out faces. What if we've been assuming that every weird occurrence is just in the player's mind? Memories, delusions, hallucinations. Any real hauntings could easily be written off as one of these. Ghosts could be haunting Playtime Co, and even though they were right in front of our faces, we didn't even consider the possibility that they could be real. The weird atmosphere, staff slowly going insane. Yes, the red smoke was likely a factor, but what if that was just masking the real problem? Playtime Co is haunted by the dead orphans that lost their lives here. Some of them sad, confused, lost, and some of them likely angry. Angry and looking for revenge for the staff that did this to them. Staff like us. Looking back at the series with this new perspective, and a lot of things start to make more sense. Why things move by themselves, why we hear voices. All we need to figure out now is whether it's the factory that is haunted or our minds, or I'm willing to bet it's a little bit of both. In fact, I think the cherry on the top of this theory is something that Sheep Rampage got close to in his latest theory. This video was fantastic, by the way, so please go check it out if you haven't already. But in that theory, he came to a conclusion about the fate of the factory. He summarized that we would end the series by burning it all down, something I actually thought myself, and I agree it seems like a likely possibility. But once again, taking a look at fire from this new perspective, there could be an even creepier message here. As I said earlier, there was a good chance that many orphans did not survive this transfer process. So what happened to all of the bodies? Well, we already probably know what happened to them. Whether the surgery was successful or not, a human body was left behind. How did Playtime Co get rid of all these bodies? Probably in this giant incinerator that was teased in Project Playtime. Playtime Co may have disposed of the bodies, but the spirits could have stayed behind. What would make this twist even more creepy is that we have seen all of these living dolls, but we haven't really considered the possibility that some of them may actually be possessed. I definitely think that Mob are hinting there is some form of haunting happening in this factory, but how this will affect the story is unknown. Once again, can we really trust voices that we hear through a telephone, especially voices of children that should have grown up long ago? We still have questions about whether is anyone still alive in this factory. Although it seems unlikely, there doesn't seem to be much food left and even the dolls seem to be running out of food, but even if there were, any children would have grown up by now. There's something that just doesn't line up, unless of course they are already dead. I think it's entirely possible in future chapters we're going to see just how dark this factory can really get. I hope you did enjoy this theory. If you did, don't forget to leave a like on the video and consider subscribing so you don't miss out on the next one. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.